Hello, this is Jen coming to you live on Sunday. Today, I thought that it would be fun to put together a little video of me reacting to popular writing advice. For context, I am an aspiring author. Already, I'm a writer. I'm a aspiring author based in LA, working on their first novel. I started this novel 2 Octobers or Novembers ago. And I thought that this might be a good time to reflect and see how all the writing advice that I was researching in the beginning of this process has panned out for me. Here we go. All right. So, one, write every day. I had a lot of pressure going into this whole process that I need to have word count goals, especially because I jumped into it with NaNoWriMo. For those who don't know, that's National Novel Writing Month, where I forget what the goal was. It's like a 50K words in a month or something like that to win NaNoWriMo. And so you could imagine that you have to hit like 1,000+ words every day to hit that goal. And so there's a lot of pressure. So there's a lot of pressure on you to get these words down, write every day. If you fall behind on writing in any given day, you're falling behind on your goal. And that after NaNoWriMo wraps up, it kind of translates over to this feeling that you have to be writing every day. You have to be making a lot of progress on your novel. And I found that I feasibly cannot write every day. And that it is good to have some distance from your work sometimes. Sometimes you need time to decompress from work. Sometimes you need time to read. Because I found that when you're writing, you can't read, and reading is pretty essential to this entire process. And when you're too close to your work, you kind of lose sight of things sometimes. So it's good to step back and assess. But anyway, so writing every day, I would say I do not agree that you have to do this. It works for some people. Some people need it to keep the momentum going, even if it's just a few words a day. But I think it's perfectly fine to take a break once in a while. Your timeline is your timeline, especially with the first novel. I think that it's this invisible pressure that you put on yourself. It's not like you have this contract saying you have to get a draft done in a year or 3 months or what have you. So I think it's perfectly fine to not write every day and do what works for you. All right, so something else. Write the book that you want to read. I think there's a lot of advice about writing for yourself out there. Like, write the book that makes you happy, write the book that makes you excited. And I think I agree with that, in that you have to be excited about your work. Otherwise, it's very likely that you're never going to finish it. A novel is not a short sprint, it is a agonizing marathon and it's not just the first draft you have to get through. You have to get through edits, several rounds of edits actually, to get it into a quote unquote like final place. But I think something that I've learned in like critiquing other people's pieces, reflecting on my own novel, getting feedback, is that while yes, it is very important to write the book for yourself, if you're trying to get published, especially if you're trying to get like traditionally published, if you're trying to write something that other people enjoy, it's really important actually to write for the reader experience as well. So, for example, you have this rich universe and world and characters and secrets and all these things in your head, but it might not come across to the reader on the page. So, for example, let's say your protagonist, your narrator, is meeting like 8 different people in one scene at the beginning, like chapter 1 or chapter 2, what have you. That is pretty overwhelming, and it's very likely that the reader is not going to be tracking all those names and characteristics being shared. Whereas you're like, I know I've like built these people with my own 2 hands. I know where they were born. I know their personalities. I know their future arcs and how important they might be to the story. But to a reader, it might kind of take them out of enjoying the piece, just being so confused about all these characters and who's speaking and who to keep track of. And on that note, there can be also something that I kind of am balancing for my piece, which is like, do readers actually care about this? Or is that something that you really care about and you thought was really cool through your research and you want to convey it in a given way, but it might be kind of get in the way of an enjoyable reader's experience? So on that note, on the advice of writing to please yourself, I agree. But I would add on to it that you should, if you're trying to get published or trying to get people to read your novel, you should also write for the reader's experience and what you think they would enjoy. But of course, ultimately, you are also a reader. So you do want to write something that you want to see in the universe and bring your own perspective. I think every single person in the world has such a unique perspective, and there are so many books that only you can write because you are the only one that thinks that way. You are the only one with those sets of experiences. So that's still something that people can enjoy. All right, so this piece of advice is what you see a lot, specifically tailored to like first-time writers, first-time novel writers, is to just start writing and keep writing. And yes, I agree with that because I think that sometimes you can, before, like, novels are so intimidating, and you can have this idea that you need to know exactly where you're going. You need to know what the big beats are. You have to know, how is the story going to start? How is it going to end? What's going to happen in between? And who are the characters that need to be there? And what are the rules of the world? I think this comes up a lot in those, like, you see these like massive character spec sheets and world building spec sheets, and you feel like, oh my god, I need to know all these things to get to know my characters and my world and be able to convey them in the right way. And I think that that is a huge barrier to starting to write. And I found that, and I think a lot of people find this, where I truly don't believe that there are any pure plotters out there. I feel like that is literally impossible to be like, know every single thing that's going to happen in your novel, because as you start writing, you start to like discover the plot almost. You start to get to know your characters as you write them, and things change. The story can go in a different direction. You might realize, like, actually, this totally other thing, twist, would be way more exciting versus what I had originally planned. So I think it is so great to have like a starting point for people who need it. But I agree that you just need to start. You just need to start writing. Don't let anything hold you back. And a blank page can be super intimidating, but you just keep in mind that I can come back and edit this at any point because it's my story and I can do whatever I want. So I totally agree with the advice that you just need to start writing and keep writing if you want to finish your first novel. Another thing that you hear a lot is to read in your genre as you're writing. I think for obvious reasons, this is very important because you need to understand genre conventions and expectations. So if you're trying to write a romance novel, you do need to know generally how romance novels tend to go. And I feel like it's really important to read in your genre, not just for that, but to also understand, like, if you want to do something unique and different, you have to understand, and you want to like subvert certain stereotypes or expectations, you have to know what they are to begin with. And I also think that beyond reading in your genre, I think it is important to read outside your genre as well. You don't have to, but I think that it just exposes you to a wider world and gives you a different perspective that can enrich your writing in a lot of ways. And another thing, I don't think this is a hot take, but I would say that it's totally fine to DNF books that you are not enjoying as a like working professional, like someone with a 9 to 5, someone who has like an hour plus commute each way. I don't have that much free time, and I don't have any time to waste on books that I'm just. If you detect a change, my camera overheated, so I took a snack break. What is it saying? Okay. Where was I? DNFing books, yeah. So I think it's completely fine to DNF books because you only have so much time in the day, and I think it's too precious to spend on books you don't enjoy. Which segues into the next bit of popular writing advice is to read as a writer. I've like definitely naturally fallen into that habit where I'm like, why do I not like this paragraph, or why do I love this novel so much? I do like to deconstruct it, and I found that I do it more often for books that and paragraphs and whatever writing that I do not enjoy as much, where I'm trying to understand how can it, like, my brain automatically is like, I would edit it this way. Whereas like really great books, like I've talked about Circe and Song of Achilles several times all over my socials. I just love them so much, and they did kind of take me away where I was like, I just want to enjoy this book. And I bought physical copies so that I can deconstruct it as part of a writer's study. But I do think that is important as well, to understand what about the things that you're reading you like, and what about the things you're reading you do not like, and applying it to your own writing. That said, another thing is how you should avoid perfectionism when you are writing your first draft. And always, honestly, you see that a lot. And that the purpose of a first draft is to exist, not to be perfect. Totally agree with that. Not that I can take this advice for my own self. I very often catch myself looking at my work and being like, this could be better. And I edit as I go. Or like, why do I not like this? I am getting better about just like moving on when I get stuck. So I'll put like placeholders, two X's or two Y's or two Z's, and move on, color code it red so I can go back to it later. But yeah, the purpose of a first draft is to exist. It's there for you to hopefully finish and not to be perfect. And the books that we are reading have gone through several revisions. They may have taken a decade to write, and it's not fair to compare yourself to these quote unquote more perfect pieces, because they probably did not look like that in draft one either. So I think it's good to try to move beyond perfectionism and make progress with your first draft if that is your goal, to finish it. But I also think it's okay to do things your way, especially again with your first draft of your first novel where it's for you. The chances that you're going to get published are very slim, or at least traditionally published are very slim with the with the first novel. So it's a way for you to learn how to write a novel. You can always look back at things. I'm listening to V.E. Schwab's podcast right now called No Right Way, meaning like there is no right way to write. And she has on very famous writers, like R.F. Kuang is in the episode that I'm listening to right now. And R.F. Kuang's like looking back at Poppy War, the first book, and being like, wow, this was not good because they've gotten a lot of distance and time since writing that first novel. And I think the goal of like a lot of published writers is at least you want to get better and better with your writing, and it will get better and better. So you can never actually be quote unquote perfect, I think. Like that doesn't exist. But you can always get better at your craft. You can always hone your skill a lot more, and maybe it will be a faster process for you to get more polished sentences in the first try. But it's okay if it's not polished. But it's okay if you want to polish. Is my opinion, my take. Okay. So next, oh God, we see this advice is always out there. Show, don't tell. And this is very broad because I think that like it's impossible to never tell and show. Sometimes you just need to tell. Sometimes you need to just be like they were shocked. You don't have to say a wave of trepidation crept up their spine or whatever. Like you can just say things sometimes and just tell, especially when the pace that you're trying to hit is a little faster. But I do understand how it is more evocative to show sometimes. Something I found in my writing is I will sometimes like start with a tell, like for example, like it was an impressive building, and then I will go into the show to talk about what about the building was impressive. And then in my edit, I'll go back and just remove that first sentence because the following subsequent sentences show you exactly why the building is impressive and it just becomes redundant. So I think that that's something that a lot of people do in their writing, or at least I found that that is something that comes up a lot in the pieces that I've been exposed to for critique. And it's very easy to just like take out the tell parts when you already are showing the show parts afterwards. Something else that comes up a lot is to be specific. And I do think that does result in more evocative imagery and makes the piece a little bit more unique. And what I mean by, I'm trying to think of an example. So, okay, so let's say you're meeting a character for the first time and you're just like, they were wearing a hat. Like, okay, they were wearing a hat. But if you were like, they were wearing a bowler's hat, or they were wearing a top hat, or they were wearing a like corduroy cap, it is a lot more evocative and interesting and memorable than just like they were wearing a hat. And this came up in my last video where in one scene, in my opening scene, I had Rose, my main protagonist. Originally, she was like holding onto a knife later in the scene, but I turned that into a sickle to make that more specific to her as a character and her work. And I think that is just adds just a little bit more flair and makes it more interesting than just like same old, same old. And you get this a lot with like the phrase, this is familiar phrasing, where you're like, it was as cold as ice, or why am I blanking? All that's in my head is like something about rain. But I can't think of anything on the spot. But you will hear that phrase of like, get rid of familiar phrasing in your piece. And while I don't think that's always possible, because sometimes it is a lot more effective to use quote unquote familiar phrasing, I agree with this piece of writing advice to try to be more specific, try to avoid familiar phrasing to make your novel more interesting and memorable. All right. So my camera is going to run out of battery soon, so this will be the last piece of advice that I react to. The oldest living memory I have of writing advice was from college. I was taking a creative writing class, and it actually didn't teach me that much about writing, curiously, but write what you know. Back then, we were writing short stories, and my protagonist was always a Korean American young woman because that is me, and I wanted to write about people like me and write what you know, write from your experiences. And I think that that was a good starting point for me to explore writing and my creativity in that way. But I think the advice of writing what you know is more about like drawing from your experiences versus being limited by your experiences per se. So for example, like no one has seen a vampire before, or at least I don't think so. Like a lot of the things we write about are things that no one in the world has ever experienced. Like, but even though we have not seen a vampire before, we have experienced fear. We have experienced like grief and love and tragedy and happiness and seen it not just in our own experiences, but people who are close to us in the media. And those are all things that can inform your story. And I think it does enrich the story in a lot of ways to be able to draw from your own experiences to inspire you. But on the flip side, I do think there are countering opinions out there. This is kind of going on a different direction, but there are things that people feel strongly that I can write about anything that I want. And on the flip side, other people are like, there are or should be limits to the types of things that people feel comfortable or feel the authority to write about. And I think that it is important to be careful about the things you write about. In that way, like to be a responsible citizen in that way, or at least that's just my opinion. So, for example, like there are so many books out there that feature colonialism. And a lot of those books in the romantasy romance space are colonizer romances. And I think that, yeah, you're allowed to write about that. But I do think that it's important to write about it while holding the concept of colonialism and the atrocities of colonialism that have happened in our real world, as well as in these fictional worlds, up to the light and criticize it in a way. And a lot of people do not do that, which I find a bit concerning. On that note, leave this video off with some writing advice of my own. So in conclusion, I say there's a lot of writing advice out there. Do with it what you will. You do not all advice is correct, quote unquote, in that it will apply to you. Like, for example, I do not have writing goals. I do not write every day. I edit as I go, and I'm okay with all of that. That's what works for me, and you will find what works for you. But just take things with a grain of salt. And like Lindy Chung likes to say, like, prescriptivist writing advice is for the birds. So yeah, if you have made it this far, please leave a heart emoji and I will leave a heart emoji back. I will probably be posting another video in a month from now, just knowing my schedule. So I hope that until then, y'all are doing great. Good luck for any new writers that have stumbled upon this video with your writing, and we're all in it together. So goodbye, have a good one, and talk soon.